All right, now we're going to look at some graphs and figure out the domain and the range from the graphs. It's really difficult to find the range from just a formula, so we don't do that. You're going to be recommended to graph them and then figure out the range. So remember, the domain is our input values, and basically we're looking for where does the function exist, and we're going left to right. So we are, sorry about that, traveling along the x-axis is what I like to think about. And we're looking up and down to say, does the function exist? And we're going to say, oh, we got to -3 here. The function exists. So my domain is going to start at -3, and it includes it because it is a closed circle. And we're going to continue on. There's no gaps. The function exists, function exists, function exists. And we get to 5. And uh-oh, the function doesn't exist anymore. And it's an open circle, so we won't include that point. So of course, in interval notation, we've got a -3, 5, 3 with a bracket, -3 with a bracket, 5 with a parentheses. Now, with the range, we're going to do the same thing, but we're going to travel along the y-axis. And we're going to say, as I go from the bottom to the top, I'm going to look to the sides and say, do I have a function? And say, oh, look, here the function exists. This is my lowest y value. It looks like it's at -4, sorry. And it's included. And we're going to keep going up the y-axis. Function exists, side to side. And we get to this 1, and the function doesn't exist. And it's an open circle. And we can see the bigger picture, so we know it's not going to pick up anywhere else. So we could write this in interval notation, of course, -4, 1, parentheses. Okay, so what about the one on the right? We're going to do the same thing. We're going to say, okay, I'm traveling along the x-axis. What's the first x-coordinate that my graph exists? And it's thankfully labeled for us right here. So our first x-coordinate is -2. And that's included. And we're going to keep going along the x-axis. I have a graph, I have a graph, I have a graph. I get to 1 and I notice, oh, that's the last point on the graph. And it's included because it's a closed dot. So there's our domain. And then we're going to do the same thing, only along the y-axis. We're going to travel up from the bottom and say, okay, my lowest point that the function exists is -1. That's the y coordinate, right? And it's included. And we're going to travel up the axis and we're going to say, okay, side to side, function exists, right over there. Function exists actually in 2 places. Keep going, function exists, function exists. Oh, I've reached the highest point on the graph right here at 4, and it's included. So it's stick to the axes, look up and down, left to right to see if the function exists. A lot of times, if you just kind of follow along the graph, students will write. It's like you look at it and you know what the domain is and you know what the range is, but then you mix and match x and y coordinates when you tell me the answer, which causes you to get it wrong. Okay. So here we've got another couple. We'll do these. So we're going to write our domain and our range. So this one is an absolute value function, and we have our arrows here. Those are not always on there. So if it leaves the window, you assume that it keeps going, whether or not the arrows are there. So our domain, we've got all real numbers coming in from -infinity, going out to +infinity. So domain all real numbers, right? Now y, on the other hand, like if I start down here at the bottom of the page, this function does not exist down at -5 or -4. It does exist at -3, right? And that's included. And as I go up and up and up and up and up, of course, as I look left to right, my function does exist, and it's going to keep going up to infinity. So there's my domain and range for that one. For the one on the right, we're going to say, okay, domain traveling along the x-axis looks like -2. And we're going to keep going, and it looks like about 4. And those are both closed dots, so they're included. Now the range is kind of boring, right? Because the range is always, right? If I travel from the bottom of the graph, you know, once you get good at this, you can kind of relax. Travel from the bottom of the graph, there's no function, there's no function, there's no function. I get to 4. There's a function, it exists, but as soon as I get off 4, it doesn't exist anymore. 4 is my entire range. Okay, so you can just say 4. I think you can say bracket 4 comma 4. You can say x equal to 4. Any of those will work. All right. So next up is our toolbox functions, but we're at 6-minute mark, so we're going to pause for a minute.